Okay, tonight's topic, rejection and rebellion. Very important topic, but it's one that I'm sure nobody in here is foreign to. Rejection is the world's way of communicating. The performance-based acceptance model that the world throws out there is a breeding ground for rejection. And there's a standard of acceptance that goes out there that constantly changes, increases all the time, and as a result, rejection happens repeatedly. And so that's what we're going to be looking at tonight. The word rejection that we're using here tonight, rejected shows up a lot in the scripture. Of course, the most number of times it's in reference to Christ. It's in reference to people rejecting God in the Old Testament, rejecting Christ as the Messiah. The word rejected that we use, or rejection, is actually derived from a Latin word that literally means thrown back. It's like if you catch a fish that's too small, you throw it away. It's thrown back. I don't want this. And so that's kind of the rejection we're looking at, the thrown back variety. Okay? It comes in all kinds of different forms, and we're going to look at that as we go through this class tonight. We're going to look at several forms of rejection. But rejection happens in major ways, in minor ways, in subtle ways, in very overt ways. It's just, and it becomes really kind of from my estimation, the foundation of people's flesh patterns, because through rejection we determine our self-worth. We determine how to avoid pain, self-protect. We look at where we stand with other people, and but we also develop strategies to avoid it. Or to deal with it and whatnot. We're going to be looking at some of those too. But how many of you, I'm trying to think if it was this class that was in level 1. I think I kind of shared a little bit of my life testimony when I talked about when I was a little kid and I got teased for having red hair. Did I talk about that in here? Remember that? Okay, well, I'm going to kind of go back to that because it's kind of, I guess, my way of showing the dynamics. That since I already used that illustration, I can use it again to show the dynamics of rejection just in my own life. It's always easier to use yourself as an example because you know it so well. So we'll kind of go through that a little bit here, but there's a musical group. Many of you are probably familiar with their music. You may not know who they are, but they're a rock orchestra, Trans-Siberian Orchestra. Any of you know who they are? Primarily do Christmas music, but that's not all they do. But in one of their Christmas CDs, it's the last one. It's a trilogy, and in the last one, an angel is getting a read on this guy who is a humbug. He's a Scrooge, but the angel notices that this guy's heart is bleeding, not in the physical sense, but he's suffering from a broken heart. So he touches him to get his story, and of course his story is kind of a tragic one, and whatnot. As a result, he's a bitter old man, and in the interlude in between songs, there's kind of a story. I think it's called a sonnet, where it's a story from the beginning to the end. and there's connectors that go between. And in that connector, it was talking about these events that happen, rejections that happen in people's lives that produce scars in their eyes. And it says, now these scars in their eyes never hurt, never bleed, but like cracks in a mirror, they distort all they see. And that's really what I see rejection does to people. It's like a crack in your windshield, there's a chip, and then all of a sudden the temperature changes, and then it spreads, and it goes every which way, or a baseball can hit it, and it shatters it. And so, there's, and you can't tell what direction those cracks are going to go, or where they will stop. And that's really what I see that rejection does in the lives of people, in the minds of people. How they look at God, how they look at themselves, how they look at life. That's how they look at relationships. So that's really, everybody's story is different. We may kind of come out with some similar looking behaviors, but everybody's got their own story, and they've got their own experiences with rejection and what they've done with it. On page 2, we've got some common forms of rejection. And keep in mind, rejection happens all the time, in all various ways. We're just kind of capsulizing some. There's the overt form of rejection, such as physical abandonment, where desertion, divorce, neglect. A child, remember, they see everything through the grid of me. They don't know anything different. Every interpretation is based on what they see, what they feel, how it impacted them, affected them. They're the hub of the wheel of their life. And so when there's an abandonment, when there's a desertion, or where there's neglect, they have to figure out what's wrong with them to deserve this. Why would they do this to me? Or why does no one want me? Why did they leave me? It may have been a divorce or something, but they don't understand the dynamics of relationships. They just know they weren't, from their perspective, I wasn't worth keeping. I wasn't worth staying for. In other words, I was thrown back. And that's how they feel. That's how they see it. So they have to make sense of it somehow. Physical abuse is another form of overt rejection. Obviously, beatings, burns, sexual abuse, denial of physical needs as punishment. Those are all very overt forms of rejection that a child feels and has to make sense of somehow. Emotional abandonment, criticism, unfavorable comparison to others, withdrawal of love and affection due to real or perceived poor performance, harsh discipline, overly strict boundaries. Overly strict boundaries set a person up for failure. They're just too high, so the person can never achieve or attain them. Teasing, unfavorable nicknames or whatnot. That's one I'm going to kind of use as an example. Denial of physical needs as punishment. Those are forms of overt, obvious rejection. Okay? Anybody in here never experienced any of that? Okay. It happens, doesn't it? And we, if we're not careful, we can turn around and give it back to others, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Then there's the covert form of rejection. This is the not so obvious. It's sometimes implied rather than felt, and so. Like relational, it says they're emotional abandonment, but it's supposed to be relational abandonment. I don't know if it says that on yours. I have some changes in here. We have some typos in here, but relational abandonment, like death. This isn't, the person didn't mean to abandon this person, they died, But for a young person, it's still abandonment. It's not they physically left by choice, but they left none the same. It's a covert form of abandonment. Chronic physical or mental illness of a significant person, like a parent, sibling, child, spouse, etc. Incarceration, somebody gets sent off to jail. Separation because of a job and or military service, where it's not like they walked away intentionally. There's a reason for it. But the child in that setting, or sometimes even a spouse, they don't necessarily, it doesn't feel like that all the time. It doesn't, the fact that it's unintentional doesn't make it less painful, okay? Then there's the emotional abandonment there, being ignored, being overprotected. That's an interesting one. You can overdo it and thus reject a person. You see how that's possible? I remember a person who would, because of the loss of one child, they just became so overprotective of the other child that they never allowed him to leave their side. And what that was telling that child is, you can't take care of yourself. You're inadequate to meet your own, they just, out of fear and a lack of understanding of God, they just hovered over that child all the time. And the person felt rejected because they couldn't go different places, they couldn't spend the night with friends, they couldn't do different things, and so it became a form of rejection to them. They weren't trusted. Does that make sense? Okay. Conditional love, which is not really love, love is unconditional, but conditional love is, you behave a certain way, you perform a certain duty, and I'll reward you. That's a form of emotional abandonment. Taking back seat to work, interest. If something's always ahead of you, more important than you, that's abandonment. No boundaries, no discipline. That too is abandonment. Where it's telling the child, I don't care about you. I'm not going to set boundaries. I'm not going to discipline you. Basically, what the child feels abandoned, even though the person may be home all the time. They just feel they don't really care about me. They don't care if I'm safe or not. And that one usually leads to the second half of this class. A lot of these do, but that one in particular leads to rebellion. They're going to make you notice them and set boundaries or whatever. Handicaps, deformities can lead to emotional abandonment. Subtle comparisons to peers or siblings, a suicide of a family member, always hard to figure out of a child or even adult. Why would they do that? Why would they leave me like that? I wasn't worth living for. So anyway, it can come from anywhere, but the most devastating is when it comes from the people that God put in their life to be the main source of love, which translates to attention, protection, meeting of needs, time spent, relational interaction, i.e. parents, brothers and sisters, grandparents, whatnot. Those are the people that God put in charge of being arteries of his love to a person. And when rejection comes from that person, it's especially damaging and confusing and painful. And so, when it comes from a peer, there's stages of life where that's more critical or more damaging, more painful than others. But that peer doesn't live with you. They're on the playground. You got to deal with them in class or something like that. The real severe ones come from the relatives, from the people who are supposed to love you. Okay, so those are the ones that tend to form the patterns of self-protection the most. And by that, I'm going to draw a little diagram here that though there's examples of all of these in Scripture, this diagram isn't found in Scripture, okay? It's not in First Pat in the Bible. But in all my years being here, dealing with various people, helping people sort out various behavioral issues and emotional bondages, I've noticed people kind of line up in four pretty broad categories here. What happens is, when rejection comes, and especially from those main arteries I was talking about, what happens is it produces pain, and so they begin to develop strategies. In understanding behavior, we talked about the strategies that people develop to, to generate contentment, love, acceptance, significance, security, those kind of things. Well, they also develop, as we grow up, we develop self-protective, strategies. We develop strategies to earn that stuff, but also strategies to avoid pain. And that's what we're going to look at here. The strategies developed out of rejection to avoid the pain that's experienced from that rejection. What happens is people generally go one of two directions, depending on their personality, oftentimes depending on the frequency or the severity or the age of the rejection. That sometimes determines the direction they're going here. Largely, it's their personality, and their surroundings. But some people, to avoid the pain of rejection, they say, okay, I'm going to earn acceptance. I don't like this rejection stuff, so I'm going to earn their approval. I'm going to earn their applause. I'm going to earn their praise. And you've got people, let me put that up here. They're earning acceptance. That's their strategy to avoid the pain of rejection, okay? And you got people in that camp that become performers. They're the type of, they're the gunners, okay? They find a skill, they find a talent, they find something that works for them. Whether it's sports, whether it's music, whether it's their looks, whether it's their intelligence, some form of ability, and they hone that to earn acceptance, at least from a group of people. Okay, a basketball player will play 3 hours of basketball, shoot free throws for 2 hours a day to get good enough, because there's a group of people that will fill an auditorium and applaud when they're good. Okay, They're the performers. That's how they avoid the rejection, is earning the acceptance. But there's another group of performers that they just broaden the audience. We call them people pleasers. They use diligence and hard work, effort, their intelligence to, it's like Bill Gillum referred to, he said, he called people like this, there's somebody that says, I'll be anybody's dog who will hunt with me. You tell me what you need, I'll do it faster, I'll do it better than the rest of the people. I'll be your go-to person. I will do what you need because I need your approval. I crave your approval. So I don't get rejected. Okay? Make sense? Know anybody like that? Okay. On this side is a different group of people. They're the ones that the ones that go this way tend, it's not always the case, but the majority of them are ones who experienced rejection at an early age, repetitively or severely. Oftentimes your physically or sexually abused people line up over here. Your people who were abandoned sometimes end up over here. Their little mind decides, you know what, this hurts. And you know what, it just keeps happening. And I've got to somehow learn how to deal with it. They're over here expecting further rejection. This side says, I've got to earn acceptance. This side says, I got to prepare for more. I've got to learn how to deal with it. I've got to slow it down or whatever. It's coming. It's a given. I just have to somehow protect myself when it happens. I have to lessen the pain. And those people tend to go two ways too. I call this side the breeders. They breed rejection. They're the overt rejection people. They're basically the one that say, I know you're going to reject me, so I'm going to give you a reason to, right up front. I'm going to dress bizarrely. I'm going to do things to my body to make you think I'm weird or whatever, make you question me. I'm going to act bizarrely to keep, I'm going to use my tongue. I'm going to use profanity, or I'm going to be rude. I'm going to push you away with my words. Anything to to cause you. I'm going to keep 90% of you from ever approaching me in the first place, because I know you're going to reject me, and that's what I call a breeder. They breed rejection. There's a safety factor in that too. Yeah, you get a lot of rejection, but the mentality of the person is, I know why they rejected me. It's because of the way I look. It's because of what I said to them, or what they really don't know me. They're rejecting me for this reason that I'm controlling. Does that make sense? There's some sick comfort in that for them. Okay, on this side are the people. They're the hiders or the isolators. They say, you know what, I've been rejected, this is painful, it keeps happening, I don't think it's ever going to stop. I'm just gonna avoid the people who do it. Okay, go to some 24-hour grocery store at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, and you're going to find a lot of these people there shopping. Why? Because most of the other people aren't there. The little kids who point and say something to their mom or whatever, they're not there. The beautiful people aren't there. So this is when they shop. Not everybody there is that way. Some people work late, and that's when they go. But you'll see that not only will there be a lot of these people shopping, but there will be a lot of these people working. That's the shift they want. Because, that's where you see your goth people and whatnot. They're gonna be there during that time. The internet was the worst thing that ever happened to these people. They see it as the best thing that ever happened because now they don't have to shop. They don't have to go outside, out of their world to shop. They can have everything delivered. They can work, from home. They used to have to find a cubicle to work in. Now I can work right from my home, and not even venture into that, that dangerous world where this is a given. Okay, does that make sense? Sometimes it's your handicapped people or your physically deformed people, maybe mentally handicapped, maybe obese, maybe, whatever. But oftentimes they're just people that have been abused, and they're just used to it, and so they're just hiding out. They've been teased their whole life or whatever. Make sense? Okay. Again, you're not going to find that, but I think you can relate to, you probably know which one you gravitate toward. And I know how to play them all, and have at various times in my life. My main gun is over here. I'm going to prove to you that I'm worthwhile. Okay, that was my strategy. Whether it was sports or academics, I could do that. Okay, so that's kind of where I focused on getting my strokes from. My wife, it lines up more here on the people pleaser side. If you're not sure where you are, ask your spouse. They'll tell you exactly where you are. But anyway, it's not that we just focus on one. I think we all know we've all done them all at various times in our life. But we also, you can probably identify your kids in there as well. Why do they do what they do? How do they play safe? Okay? So we'll come back to you. Remember, Jesus said, "My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives peace do I give to you. My peace I give to you." Again, we got to come back to, trusting Christ for our identity, for our self-worth, for His acceptance of us, demonstrated, a person's value is determined by, anything's value is determined by the price that you pay for it. I had a Reggie Jackson rookie card on my wall, and my kids, when baseball cards were their big thing, they looked it up in the Beckett book, and Dad, your Reggie Jackson rookie cards were $660. And I said, "No, it's not." And he said, "Yeah, it is, right here." And I said, "It'll be worth $660 when somebody hands me $660 for that. Then it'll be worth that. It's worth what somebody's willing to pay." Correct? Okay. We can place any kind of value we want on it, but if nobody pays it, nobody declared it worth that much. But to the person who paid the $660, if they would have, to them, it was valued at $660. Okay? What were you paid? What was paid for you? Someone who knows you set your value, and it was a very high price, which means you have a very high value. But as a child, when this is going on, we don't see that. We don't know that. We just accept what we're given. We're being told we're worth less. And so out of that, we develop behaviors to, protect against that shows that. But in the latter part of this class, we're going to look at one that we tend to go toward, and that's rebellion. Rejection breeds rebellion. It just does. Okay? But let's finish up the rejection here, the effects of rejection. I'm just going to breeze through some things, highlight some things. There's some great stuff in here that I'm going to have to, for the sake of time, skip over. Read through it, because you know what? You're going to maybe find some things that talk about you in there, and you're going to find some things that talk about your spouse or your kids or your co-workers or whatever. And remember, every action makes sense if you know what the person's thinking, if you know what they believe. And this forms the cracks, the scars in their eyes, the cracks in the mirrors that they're looking at themselves in, or the scars in their eyes that they're looking at the world through. And so when some of these behaviors, these effects, will kind of tell you a little bit about that person, okay? The effects of rejection, it undermines a person's self-esteem. We've already talked about that. It breeds a mistrust of others, resulting in difficulty expecting people to be friendly or accepting. That's kind of this group of people here. Defensiveness, guard is always up. Don't point out my flaws. There's a reason for it. I didn't do it. Okay. Inability to receive love and acceptance from others is a huge one. Marked difficulty believing and accepting God's unconditional love. This is a real, when you've experienced this and all the emotions that go with it, it's really hard when somebody tells you their value is declared by Jesus' death on the cross. They don't see it. It's hard for them to accept it. It really is. So they have it oftentimes a real difficulty. Have you ever met somebody, there's so many good examples in there's sad examples, let's put it that way. Have you ever noticed, if you look at the kind of the tragic lives of John Belushi, John Candy, various other really funny people, why were they so funny? They all had something in common. They were all pretty heavy, okay? All their life, and if you read anything about it, if you read their story, they were heavy. They knew they were heavy. They got teased for being heavy. So what'd they do? They became comedians. They became funny guys, because that would making people laugh would throw off the attention given to what people usually commented about them. But also they usually made fun of their own selves or their own weight or whatever. You notice that they made fun of themselves. What a painful existence. You know, it's like turning rejection to self-rejection to get people to laugh at you. You know, and it seems like it's healthy, but it's really not healthy, is it? You know, it's just a diversion. It's a screen to hide behind. And if you read, there are a lot of great comedians, you know, several of them died of drug overdoses, and they just led really, really sad lives, So even though they're really funny and you think, oh, well, they have a great sense of humor, they must be a joy to be around, probably not. Okay, that's the kind of effects of rejection. You gotta figure out a way to avoid it or to deal with it. You know, sometimes you even join it, you know, like those guys did. So, you know, it's an effect of rejection. It's a confidence destroyer. You know, it gives them a false perception of their ability. If they were told by their father, for instance, that they're a failure or a loser, or they never match up to their brother, you know what? A child can end up believing that, and they may be brilliant. They may be creative. They may be very talented, but they won't use it because it just kind of gets shut down. It gets throttled down. It's like there's a governor on it. Well, this is as good as I can do because I can't do as good as my brother or whatever. So it just becomes a destroyer. It causes people, like in a relationship, I see this all the time, they come into it expecting the person to reject them. They're just waiting for it. So they protect their heart because they're pretty sure that person's going to leave them. And so, you know, it won't hurt as bad. So what they're doing is they're actually causing it because they won't give their heart. They won't open their heart. The person gets frustrated, and then the person does leave, and they go, see, I knew it. I knew it. Kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy type thing. And you wonder, why would they do something like that? Well, you know what? It makes sense to them. That's what rejection just twists everything around. It impairs the ability to give love. Everything becomes subjective or about them. You know, the victim mentality comes out of that. You know, that's a very tough one. Perfectionism. You know, I've got to be perfect in order to not be rejected. So, you know, that's where OCD comes from. That's where, I mean, you can't make a mistake because somebody will point it out. Prone to bitterness, anger, and depression. You know, people have anxiety. You know, they deal with anxiety over this because they can't. They're just waiting for the next event that's going to demonstrate that they're inadequate. May have difficulty in making decisions. Sometimes becoming passive. They shut down because they don't want to do something that's going to cause people to laugh or say, oh, you didn't do a good job, so they choose to do nothing. It just can totally paralyze or cripple a person. You know, I mentioned the victim mentality. That one, you know, they turn it, they turn their failure to be somebody, they blame somebody, something else. You know, yeah, I failed, but, you know, I had no choice because of what you did or what happened to me or whatever. You know, and they just, you know, sometimes they do things to fail to blame someone else because they have the right to. This is, you know, I mean, it's a twisting thing to a person's mind, okay? Another one on here that I see a lot, becomes a bottomless pit for affection. You know, somebody may be demonstrating love to them, but man, it's just never enough. It's just not quite, do you love me? Do you love me? You don't love me enough, because if you would, you'd come home, you'd be home by, it takes 10 minutes to get from work. If, you'd be home by 10 after 5 if you really loved me. It puts so much responsibility on the other person. They become a bottomless pit for affection and attention. Okay? So, read through that and, kind of take your time going through that and looking at it and say, okay, I've seen this, I've read through it multiple times, and every time I think, oh, that breeds this and this and this. I got all kinds of notes out here just from reading through it going, oh, and that's why this person does this and that kind of thing. So go through and do it on your own. There's a checklist here of attitudes and reactions a rejected person demonstrates toward their spouse and or children. Okay? Go through that. And just kind of look, it's kind of a personal checklist, but you can use it for maybe your kids. Not that they should do it, but you kind of go through it and say, oh, okay. Where's my child's demonstrating some of this? Where are they picking that up from? Where are they feeling rejected? Because you can remedy a lot of this stuff if you catch it. Okay. There's a biblical response, solution to rejection. It's how to deal with somebody that you might be working with, somebody you might be discipling, somebody that you might be raising as a child or even living with as a spouse. How do you deal with that? There's some suggestions here on the back page. The biblical response to rejection. So read through that, and if you have any questions on that, be sure to ask them. Okay? All right. Now remember, I mentioned at the beginning I was going to use myself as an example, but I see I'm not going to have time, so maybe we will in the discussion part of this, because I want to move on to the rebellion, which is again, it's another response oftentimes to this, to the rejection. There's an anger that wells up, that builds up inside of a person from, it's not just that, oh, well, there I got rejected again, getting used to that. No, everyone is a bruise, and it adds to an existing bruise, and it makes more tender the bruise each time it happens. And in the class on anger and forgiveness, that's one of those things we talk about. It just builds and builds and builds and builds, where pretty soon the person is living to protect that bruise, and basically sometimes out of their anger they just say, forget all of you. I'm not living by your rules. They do it with people close to them. They do it with society. They do it with the law, whatever. But rebellion tends to be, not that rejection and the hurt from it is the only thing that produces rebellion, but it's certainly a big one. The Old Testament uses 4 Hebrew words to describe rebellion. New Testament 3. The first one in the New Testament is basically the person that won't obey. The second one is the person does the opposite of what they're told. The third one is the person that argues against authority. So there's kind of 3 different connotations or 3 different flavors, so to speak, of rebellion. The faces of rebellion, blatant rebellion, that kind of tends to show up like this, the blatant rebellious person. Some of you, probably have dealt with people like this. They may be openly defiant. That's supposed to be defiant, not deviant. Defiant and maybe in your face about it. Because they are self-willed and headstrong, they are usually quarrelsome and argumentative. They'll put a value on being a nonconformist and openly display this through their words, actions, and lifestyle. Independence is important. They may be a defiant loner and may rather die than change. These type of people, you have to be suspicious as to whether or not they're really a believer. I've got some of these in my life, and I'm shaking my head, scratching my head all the time. I'm wondering, is there a heartbeat of God in there? Because they end up, am I still on? Yep. Okay. They end up being really kind of this type of person. They're just antagonistic, they're rude, they're vulgar. And you wonder, oftentimes they say they're a believer, but you really have to question it. So there's the arrogant rebellion. This one's grounded in pride. This is the person that, they tend to be over here more on the performer side. They're so good they don't have to live by the rules of anybody else. They're gonna defy because they're smarter, they're better, they're above the rules. They're proud of their opinions and they won't mind telling you what they are. They'll be, when they're silent, there'll be a smugness about them that basically says, you're an idiot. I've already decided what I'm going to do and you're wrong. That kind of thing. They become divisive people. Oftentimes they'll kind of rally a group of people to support them in their opinion or their perspective. There's the hedonistic rebellion. These tend to be kind of the performers too. But this is this person's pursuit is pleasure and sensual self-indulgence. They will break any kind of rules, whether they're rules of God or even rules of the land, if it's gonna feel good or bring them pleasure. It's all about them. Okay. The unpersuaded rebellion, disobedience. Sometimes rebellion and disobedience are a little hard to distinguish between. And it's really kind of, especially in parenting, you really have to kind of be careful and pray about that, because sometimes what looks like rebellion is really, it's disobedience. And a rebellion is more of I absolutely will not submit to you as an authority. Disobedience can be being naughty. Disobedience can be, it can look the same way, but it's basically, maybe trying to get something that they want, knowing that they can't have it or something like that. You got to be kind of careful there. Unattentive rebellion or disobedience. This is the one that's kind of hard to define, really. Where did I want to read? This is the person that in James 1:22 is described as being a hearer and not a doer of the word. It's kind of, they'll give the appearance of, maybe I'm going to do this, I'm agreeing with you, but then they don't put it into action. That's basically, kind of a passive sort. There's creative rebellion. This one I find this is kind of lines up with licentiousness. You know, it's the person that walks the line a little bit in the Christian world. The carnal Christian or the believer that walks according to the flesh resides in this category. These people tend to walk closely to boundaries. They may or may not cross the boundary. If they do cross the boundary, they make sure they can get back within the boundaries quickly so they will not suffer any negative consequences. These people want the best of both worlds, both the blessings of Christ and the world, while simultaneously avoiding the apparent downside of both. They believe that there are three ways of living their lives: God's way, the way of the world, which is driven by the devil, and their way. Okay? You know, again, licentiousness. You know, it's turning grace into license. You know, I know God loves me, and I know He's forgiven me, so it doesn't really matter if I cross over this line. I'm forgiven anyway, and it's kind of fun over this line temporarily, so I'm going to go ahead and cross it for this moment, that kind of thing. Rebellion of the victim. This is that victim mentality, and they rail against society. You know, you see this all the time. You hear these people are very vocal. We've got them all around us. You know, they're the way they are because somebody else did something to them. It's, you know, whether it's the government, whether it's, you know, a race issue or whatnot. It's, you know, I'm entitled to be this way because this happened to me or you know, my, you know, ancestors or whatever. I mean, they're owed, they're vengeant, sometimes they're mean or even cruel in their actions. So that's that one. Passive rebellion. These are the rule breakers or the expectation breakers. They're kind of the passive aggressive people. You know, they're hard to motivate, they're forgetful, procrastination, sulking, pouting, being chronically late, messiness. They go to extremes to avoid confrontation, wants help while simultaneously refusing it. You know, I think you've met these people. Some of those might strike kind of close to home. There's sometimes there's a fear that lies at the root of this, a fear of failure or a fear of success. You know, procrastination, for instance. Why does a person procrastinate? You know, there's something that blocks what they're doing, but sometimes it's just, you know, I feel like I'm being told to do something. There's a deadline, and so I rebel against deadlines, so I'm going to push it right to the very end. Yeah, I'll do what you asked me to do, but I'm not going to do. You know, you'll see people lining up, and there's people that do it because it's wise to hang on to your money, but a lot of people do it because they're not. You're going to see a line outside of the post office on April, I guess it's the 17th this year, tax deadline day. You know, some people do it. Well, I'm hanging on to my money as long as I can and getting interest from it before I pay. Other people are saying, "Oh, geez, it's due already." You know, so procrastination is kind of a or messiness or things like, you know, that's that passive aggressive rebellion. There's a root somewhere in there. The effects of rebellion, you know, it's a distortion of our relationship with and the worship of God. I'd really like you to walk through these on your own. There are a ton of verses here. There's you know, all of these promotion of corruption, decay, and deceitfulness. That's Proverbs 28. breeds lack of respect and or apathy, Psalm 36. Product of arrogance, becoming wise in your own eyes, that's Proverbs 3. It leads to foolishness, that's Proverbs 28. Impairs one's ability to know God's ways, Psalm 51. Can lead to illness, Psalm 107. Cavalier attitude toward or disregard for God's discipline, that's Hebrews 12:5. You know, I mean, there's a lot of effects of rebellion that are marked in Scripture. You know, both in the Old and the New Testament, because rebellion's not a new thing. It's not the latest fad. Okay, lack of thankfulness in Romans 1, Ephesians 4 says people walk in the futility of their mind, darkened understanding, separation from the life of God, the Zoe life, the fulfillment of God, the hardness of heart, callousness, being delivered over to sensuality. They become servants of their lust. They give an opportunity or a place for the enemy. You know, rebellion, remember, is as the sin of witchcraft. Rebellion is major league. Not that one sin worse than the other, but the ramifications of some sins are worse than others. The consequence of some sin is worse than others. Rebellion is one that God does not really let slide. He deals with rebellion, and he tells us to deal with rebellion in issues of parenting and things like that. So rebellion will kill a person, and rebellion will put somebody right in the hands of the devil, and so God deals with it swiftly. It doesn't mean the person changes, but God's dealing with it, and you see the consequences of a rebel's life a lot. You see a lot of people sitting in jail because of their rebellion. The solution, make sure that you are identifying what you are identifying as truly rebellion. Okay, that's the biggie. What looks like rebellion. This is especially when you're dealing with discipline, like of your children. Make sure rebellion that looks like rebellion is not actually, just disobedience or something else. It might be fear. It might be, make sure you get to the root of it before you discipline it. So read through the solution again on this one, and come back with questions if you've got any, or we can talk about some of these in our break period here. But please read through both of these handouts. I really enjoy. They're not. We have some typos in them, but that's not what I enjoy. That was somebody's passive aggressive rebellion there, but certainly not mine. since I do nothing like that. That's probably a form of rebellion on my own. I'm not a computer person. My wife says that's because I'm rebellious. She may be right. I don't know. But anyway, read through it. I think there's some insightful things in there that'll help you as well as I read through it again here, preparing for this class, and I had a lot of things highlighted, but God highlighted some new things for me as I read through it, and things that I think He wants to talk, things that I know He wants to talk to me about. Okay, so do that as well. Okay.